The liquid was ice cold. It carried the heavy, fermented scent of dark berries and the sharp, unmistakable sting of pure malice. It hit my eyes first, a sudden and blinding rush that forced my eyelids to snap shut before the dark crimson fluid cascaded down my cheeks, dripped off my chin, and bloomed into a massive, ugly stain across the front of my white silk blouse. We were sitting in the middle of a packed, upscale Italian restaurant in downtown Austin on a busy Saturday night. There were dozens of wealthy diners around us, 3 servers carrying heavy silver trays, and 2 bartenders shaking cocktails near the entrance. In one fraction of a second, the entire world simply stopped spinning. The ambient chatter of the dining room vanished. The soft clinking of crystal glasses ceased. The low jazz playing over the hidden speakers seemed to fade into nothingness. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and dead. For one agonizing moment, the only sound I could process was the frantic, hammering rhythm of my own heart, followed closely by the soft, deliberate clink of my husband setting his silver fork down on his porcelain plate. He moved with a cautious, pathetic slowness, as if the horrific mess currently dripping from my face was merely a minor disruption to his expensive pasta dish. My mother-in-law, Vesper, leaned across the crisp white tablecloth. Her eyes were narrowed into thin, predatory slits. Her face was twisted into a terrifying mask of aristocratic fury. She did not yell. She did not scream or throw her arms around to cause a loud scene. Instead, her voice carried a venomous, weighted edge that cut straight through the quiet room like a serrated blade. She looked down her nose at me, her chest heaving slightly under her designer dress, and hissed the words that would ultimately destroy her own life. "You owe this family. You are nothing but an entitled, selfish outsider living off our grace, and you will sign those papers tonight, or I will personally ensure you never find peace in this town again." The humiliation was a physical force. It hit me like a hot, suffocating wave that burned deep beneath my skin, making the tips of my fingers go numb and my hands shake violently beneath the table. Every single person in that dining room was watching us. Their eyes darted back and forth between the dripping red wine on my face, the dark stain ruining my clothes, and the stony, remorseless expression anchored on Vesper's face. I felt the hot prickle of tears threatening to blur my vision. The salt water pushed against the corners of my eyes, desperate to fall. But I forced them back. I swallowed the lump of pure pain in my throat and dug my fingernails into my own palms until the physical sting grounded me. Vesper lived for tears. She fed on the emotional breakdowns of others. It was her signature move. If I cried, she would instantly transform into the calm, rational matriarch dealing with a hysterical, unstable younger woman. I refused to give her that satisfaction. I refused to play the victim in her twisted, self-serving narrative. Instead of screaming, instead of throwing my water glass back at her face, I took a deep, steadying breath. I reached for my thick cloth napkin, calmly wiped the wet, sticky wine from my eyes, my nose, and my mouth. I folded the napkin and set it down neatly beside my untouched entree. I reached into my purse, pulled out a $100 bill, and placed it under my water glass to cover my portion of the meal. I stood up, smoothed down the ruined, clinging silk of my blouse, picked up my leather purse, and turned my back on them. Behind me, I heard my husband, Declan, clear his throat. He murmured my name once. Sutton. His voice was flat. It was devoid of any real urgency, devoid of any protective instinct, devoid of love. It was the bare minimum effort, a pathetic attempt to make it look like he cared for the sake of the onlookers, but his eyes never left his plate. He did not stand up. He did not chase after me. He just sat there, a hollow shell of a man, letting his mother humiliate his wife in front of 50 strangers. By the time my boots hit the cold concrete sidewalk outside, my skin was still tingling from the alcohol, and my fingers had gone entirely stiff. My body understood the gravity of the betrayal long before my pride could fully process the reality of the situation. As I walked toward my car under the dim yellow streetlights, a heavy, dark realization settled deep in my chest. Vesper was a woman obsessed with appearances. She spent her entire life cultivating the image of a refined, untouchable high society broker. She would never, ever risk a public outburst like that just out of a petty temper tantrum. This was a calculated strike. It was a desperate act of psychological intimidation meant to break my resolve. The dinner had never been about making peace. The apologies Declan had promised me earlier in the week were lies. And the thick cream envelope currently resting on the passenger seat of my car held a secret far darker than a simple family disagreement. I unlocked my vehicle with trembling fingers and climbed into the driver's seat. I stared at my own reflection in the rearview mirror. The dark red stains looked like fresh blood under the artificial lights, a stark, glaring visual reminder of the toxic family I had willingly married into. For 3 long years, I had tried to convince myself that Vesper's coldness was just a generational barrier. I had told myself that Declan's passivity was just his way of avoiding conflict. But as I pulled out of the restaurant parking lot, leaving them behind in the warmth of the dining room, the fragile illusion of my marriage shattered into a million unfixable pieces. I drove through the quiet streets of the Austin suburbs. The steady hum of the tires against the asphalt was the only sound filling the cabin of the car. I did not head toward the suburban house I shared with Declan. The thought of walking into that space made my skin crawl. Instead, I drove straight toward the one place where I felt entirely secure. I drove toward the single asset that had caused this entire nightmare to begin with. My mind raced backward over the past 3 weeks, frantically untangling the web of hushed whispers, the late-night phone calls between Declan and his mother, and the sudden, aggressive shift in their attitude toward my property. They had spent 21 days framing their aggressive demands as a simple matter of marital unity. They used carefully constructed phrases like housekeeping updates and smart future planning to mask their true intentions. Declan had looked at me with those sad, puppy dog eyes, claiming that adding his name to the title of my building was just a formality. He said it was a way to ensure that we were building a solid life together as equal partners. But equality was never their goal. Total control was the only thing they cared about. And as the dark Texas highway stretched out before me, the headlights cutting through the night, I knew that the cream envelope sitting next to me was the key to understanding just how far they were willing to go. Did they really think a splash of wine and a public threat would make me surrender everything I had bled for? Did they truly believe I was that weak? They had severely underestimated who they were dealing with, and they were about to learn exactly what happens when you push a rational woman past the point of no return. To fully understand why that horrific moment in the restaurant felt like a lethal, calculated strike, you have to look at the history. You have to walk through the quiet, institutionalized disrespect I had survived since the very day I slipped a wedding ring onto my finger. In the grand, fictional narrative of the family, I was the invisible scapegoat. I was the girl from a modest, working-class background whose self-made success was always treated as a bizarre, lucky fluke rather than the result of relentless, grueling hard work. I am a regional supply chain manager for a major logistics firm. It is a corporate role that requires absolute precision, analytical grit, and often 50 hours a week of managing complex international shipping networks. I built my career from nothing. I survived my early 20s on black coffee, instant noodles, and a mountain of student loans. I fought for every single promotion. Yet, to Vesper and her daughter, Cressida, my demanding job was a frequent punchline. At extravagant family barbecues, Vesper would wave her perfectly manicured hand, flash a fake, dazzling smile, and tell her wealthy guests that I worked in storage. She would say I was just a clerk who counted cardboard boxes all day, before swiftly pivoting the conversation to boast about Declan's grand entrepreneurial ventures or Cressida's latest luxury vacation to Europe. Cressida was the textbook golden child. She was a 26-year-old woman who lived in a perpetual, unbreakable bubble of self-absorption. Her entire lifestyle was funded by Vesper's real estate earnings and Declan's endless, enabling behavior. 2 years ago, Cressida decided she wanted a lavish destination wedding in Cabo San Lucas. It was meant to be a 3-day affair with artisanal floral arrangements, a live band, and a rented yacht for the rehearsal dinner. But 3 weeks before the event, the luxury catering company threatened to cancel the entire contract due to a massive payment delay. Vesper didn't dip into her own corporate funds to solve the crisis. Instead, she sent Declan to corner me in our kitchen late at night. He begged. He pleaded. He swore on his own life that it was a temporary cash flow emergency. Out of a foolish, naive desire to be accepted as a good sister-in-law, I logged into my bank portal and transferred $45,000 of my hard-earned personal savings to save the wedding from disaster. To this very day, that money has never been repaid. Whenever I cautiously brought it up, Cressida would roll her eyes, sigh dramatically, and whisper to her mother that I was ruining her sacred memories with my financial pettiness. Vesper would then step in, using that soft, deeply patronizing tone to remind me that family does not keep score. She effectively turned my massive generosity into proof of my supposed greed. But the ultimate source of tension, the shining crown jewel that Vesper could never stomach, was my real estate asset. 5 years before I even met Declan, my maternal grandmother passed away. She left me a beautiful, structurally flawless 8-unit luxury mini-apartment complex in a rapidly gentrifying suburb of Austin, Texas. It was a rare, highly valuable piece of real estate, and it was unencumbered by a mortgage. When I first inherited it, the property needed significant, exhausting work. I poured my blood, my sweat, and every spare dime into its rejuvenation. I personally managed the aggressive contractors. I paid $48,000 directly out of my own pocket to replace the failing main drainage lines. I spent my weekends painting the units, installing new fixtures, and updating the exterior landscaping until my hands were covered in blisters. Today, that complex is valued at $2.8 million. It brings in a steady, substantial monthly rental income that I kept strictly segregated in a separate, secure bank account. Declan moved into my spacious personal manager's suite on the top floor after our wedding, but Vesper never accepted that her son was living on my territory. She viewed my sole ownership as a direct insult to his manhood. She called it a cold, transactional arrangement that kept her son living at my mercy. She began dropping subtle, poisonous comments during our weekly Sunday dinners. She would sip her expensive wine and suggest that a real, loving wife would naturally want her husband's name on the deed to show true marital commitment. The reality of the situation was far more pathetic. 6 months ago, Declan's sports equipment distributorship began to crater into the ground. He had overexpanded his warehouse space, mismanaged his imported inventory, and completely ignored the glaring warning signs of a shifting market. First came the missed vendor payments. Then came the frantic late payroll notices. Finally, his senior business partner quietly pulled his capital out of the venture and left Declan holding a massive mountain of commercial debt. Instead of acting like an adult and facing the music, Declan ran straight to his mother. Vesper, whose commercial real estate brokerage was also secretly bleeding cash due to a sharp downturn in the local market, saw my unmortgaged property as the ultimate golden lifeline. She began orchestrating a relentless campaign of psychological warfare. She used her professional real estate background to make financial theft sound like strategic wealth protection. She would look at me across her massive granite kitchen island, adjusting her expensive silk scarf, and talk endlessly about leveraging global assets to secure the family's future legacy. When I told Declan a firm, unequivocal no, explaining calmly that my grandmother's property would never be used as collateral for his business mistakes, the atmosphere in the family changed overnight. The subtle, passive-aggressive hints turned into aggressive, daily demands. It culminated in that awful dinner invitation. Vesper had assumed that by trapping me in a high-end restaurant, surrounded by the elite peers she so deeply respected, I would bow to the intense social pressure. She thought I would sign whatever she placed in front of me just to keep the peace. She truly believed that throwing her wine would break my spirit, forcing me to run back to her crying for forgiveness. But as I pulled my car into the quiet driveway of my apartment complex, the sharp sting on my face transformed into a cold, terrifyingly calm determination to protect my life's work. The leasing office of my apartment complex was dark and quiet. It smelled faintly of old cedar wood and fresh printer paper. I bypassed the residential living quarters entirely, using my master key to unlock the heavy deadbolt to my private back office. I flipped on the overhead pendant lights, bathing the room in a bright, clinical glow. I pulled the cream envelope from my leather purse. My fingers left faint, wine-stained smudges against the heavy, expensive linen paper. My heart was pounding a steady, rhythmic warning against my ribs as I slid the thick stack of documents out onto the smooth surface of the desk. At first glance, the paperwork looked exactly like the corporate deed packages Vesper's brokerage generated every single day. It contained a standard warranty deed, a signature page, a traditional notary acknowledgement block, and a borrower information disclosure sheet. It was meticulously designed to look routine. It looked like a piece of mundane administrative paperwork that any busy professional might skim over and sign without a second thought. That was the trap. But as a supply chain manager, my entire career is built on identifying tiny, hidden discrepancies in massive data sheets. I am trained to look for the error, the missing link, the anomaly. I turned to the second page of the packet, and my breath caught sharply in my throat. In the upper right-hand corner, barely visible beneath a heavy metal staple, was a digital recording stamp from the Travis County Clerk's office. It wasn't a blank draft stamp. It wasn't a submission preview or a placeholder. It was a finalized, completed electronic recording index number. It was fully assigned and validated by the state system. My stomach did a violent, sickening flip. I forced myself to sit down in the heavy leather desk chair. I pulled the brass desk lamp closer, angling the beam directly onto the paper, and read the text line by line. My eyes scanned the dense, convoluted legal jargon, translating the archaic terms into the horrifying reality of what had just happened to me. The document didn't just propose a future title change. It officially recorded a transfer of ownership that had already taken place. The paperwork purported to show that I, Sutton, had willingly and legally transferred the entire $2.8 million property from my sole name into a joint tenancy by the entirety with Declan. It stripped away my exclusive rights. It granted him equal ownership and immediate, unrestricted access to the equity I had spent years protecting. Clipped directly behind the forged deed was a second, even more terrifying packet. It was a preliminary commercial loan application from Texas Commercial Bank. The loan amount requested was $1.2 million. The primary borrower listed was Declan. The co-borrower was listed as me. And the sole collateral listed to secure this massive, immediate injection of cash was my apartment complex. I leaned back in my chair, the crushing silence of the empty office pressing hard against my ears. The realization hit me with the force of a freight train. They hadn't invited me to dinner to persuade me to change my mind. They hadn't hosted me at that upscale Italian restaurant because I was being stubborn and they wanted to smooth things over. They had invited me to that restaurant because the fraud was already in motion. They needed a signed copy of the final closing disclosures to present to the bank's funding officer on Monday morning to release the cash. The public humiliation, the screaming, the glass of red wine thrown directly into my face, it was a twisted, desperate distraction technique. They wanted to keep me entirely off balance. They wanted to shock my system so violently that I wouldn't look too closely at what they had already done behind my back. They expected me to go home, cry hysterically in our bedroom, feel entirely isolated and broken, and then let Declan comfort me into signing the remaining pages out of sheer emotional exhaustion. I did not sleep a single wink that night. I sat at that wooden desk until the dark sky outside the window slowly turned a pale, frosted gray. I watched the headlights of early morning commuters flicker against the painted wall of the office. Every time I closed my burning eyes, I saw Vesper's sneering, triumphant face. I saw Declan's cowed, silent posture as he stared at his plate. My entire marriage was a hollow illusion. It was a beautiful, elaborate cover story for a family of high-society parasites who saw me merely as an endless ATM with a lucrative lease portfolio. At 7:45 in the morning, the red wine stain on my silk shirt was completely dry and stiff. I felt no fatigue, only a pure, crystalline focus. I gathered every single page of the fraudulent document, perfectly aligned the edges, and slid them carefully back into the cream envelope. I walked out to my vehicle, the crisp morning air filling my lungs. The time for tears had long passed. The time for trying to win their approval was dead. It was time to introduce Vesper and her beloved, cowardly son to the brutal legal reality of what happens when you try to steal from a woman who tracks every single moving piece for a living. By 8:15 on Monday morning, the city of Austin was fully awake and bustling with traffic. I was sitting inside the sleek, glass-walled conference room of Marin, a sharp, no-nonsense real estate litigator who had assisted my grandmother with the original property trust cleanup years ago. Marin was a formidable woman. She dressed in immaculate, tailored gray suits, spoke in precise, measured cadences, and possessed a legendary, terrifying reputation for dismantling fraudulent property claims across the state. She didn't offer me a sympathetic smile. She didn't ask how my weekend was or offer me a warm cup of tea. She simply took the cream envelope from my hands, laid the documents flat on the polished mahogany table, and began to read. I sat silently, watching her face carefully. For the first 2 minutes, the only sound in the room was the soft rustle of paper. Halfway through the second page, her eyes went entirely still. She adjusted her silver-rimmed glasses, leaning much closer to the digital recording stamp at the top corner of the deed. "Sutton," she said, her voice dropping into a low, dangerous register that commanded immediate attention. "Did you execute this electronic transfer? Did you sign this document at any point?" "No," I replied, my voice steady despite the massive rush of adrenaline coursing through my veins. "I didn't even know it existed until Saturday night after the dinner." "Did you ever authorize Declan or his mother or Vesper's brokerage to utilize your digital credentials or submit county filings on your behalf?" Marin asked, her pen hovering over a yellow legal pad. "Never. Not once." Marin turned the document around, tapping her silver pen heavily against the bottom of the page. "Then look closely at this." I leaned forward, bracing my hands on the edge of the table. There, resting on the formal signature line of the county deed, was my name. It was written in a flowing, elegant cursive that looked remarkably like my own handwriting at a very casual glance. But as I stared at it under the bright fluorescent lights of the conference room, the glaring imperfections became obvious. I noticed the slight, hesitant tremors in the loops of the letters. I saw the unnatural pressure points where the pen had lingered too long, indicating someone slowly copying a shape rather than naturally signing their own name. It was an imitation. It was a carefully practiced forgery specifically designed to clear the automated verification software used by the county portal. Marin didn't waste a single second. She turned her chair toward her massive dual-monitor setup and logged directly into the secure Travis County Recorder database using her specialized attorney credentials. I sat there, feeling the left side of my face still faintly tender from where the acidic wine had irritated my skin, watching her fingers fly rapidly across the mechanical keyboard. Within 3 short minutes, she bypassed the public search and brought up the official, internal ledger. The deed had been accepted by the automated system at exactly 4:46 in the afternoon on Friday. That was just 14 minutes before the county offices officially closed for the weekend. It had been recorded and locked into the system before Vesper even sat down at the restaurant table. Marin kept clicking, digging much deeper into the digital metadata attached to the file. The deeper she went, the grimmer her expression became. The air in the room grew cold. "It is significantly worse than we thought," she murmured, turning one of the large monitors toward me so I could see the screen. They didn't just file the deed to sit on it and look at it. The newly recorded document was used overnight to satisfy an emergency collateral requirement for Declan's commercial loan application. She pointed to a dense block of text at the bottom of the screen. "And look at the cross-collateralization clause listed right here. This is the smoking gun." I scanned the tiny legal text. The massive loan wasn't just funding Declan's failing sports business. The funds were tied directly to a master operating account that was personally guaranteed by Vesper's commercial real estate firm. Vesper's elite, supposedly untouchable empire wasn't just struggling, it was actively drowning in debt. They had used my unmortgaged property as a massive financial anchor to keep themselves afloat. They had built an entire fraudulent infrastructure over the weekend. They assumed that by the time I discovered the missing title, the loan would be approved, the money would already be spent, and I would be left fighting a massive $2.8 million debt tied around my neck. They thought I would be too scared of the legal fees to fight back. Marin reached for her heavy desk phone, her eyes flashing with a cold, predatory light that made me incredibly grateful she was sitting on my side of the table. I am filing an immediate title fraud affidavit, an expedited recorder challenge, and a formal lender notice to freeze the funds right now. Let's see exactly how well their pristine empire holds up when the foundation turns to dust. The atmosphere inside Marin's office instantly shifted from investigative curiosity to tactical, aggressive warfare. She began drafting the complex legal notices with an icy, mechanical efficiency. The first document she prepared was a formal title fraud affidavit. This was a sworn legal statement declaring, under strict penalty of perjury, that the signature on the recorded deed was a complete forgery and that I had never intended to alienate, transfer, or encumber my property in any way. Attached directly to this affidavit were several clear specimen signatures from my grandmother's original trust transfer papers from 5 years ago. These historical documents showcase the undeniable, glaring stylistic differences between my actual handwriting and the forged, trembling script they had submitted. Next came the critical emergency notices to the fraud and collateral compliance departments at Texas Commercial Bank. Marin explained the strategy as her pen flew furiously across her yellow legal pad. "Banks are terrified of title fraud," she said, her voice sharp and focused. "The absolute moment this notice hits their internal compliance desk, the loan will be locked down in a digital iron vault. By serving them with actual knowledge of a legally disputed title, the bank faces catastrophic, multi-million-dollar liability if they proceed to fund Declan's $1.2 million line of credit. No one touches a single dime. They won't even be able to buy a cup of coffee with that account." But the most intriguing, mind-boggling piece of the puzzle came when Marin tracked down the notary public whose state seal and signature appeared on the verification block of the forged deed. The notary was listed in the state registry as an independent mobile service provider named Jessica Finch. Marin quickly placed a direct call to the Texas Secretary of State's Notary Division, cross-referencing the registration number to find her direct contact information. At exactly 10:15 in the morning, Marin's desk phone rang loudly. It was Jessica Finch calling back from what sounded like a very noisy coffee shop somewhere in North Austin. Marin immediately pressed the speakerphone button, ensuring I could hear every word. "Miss Finch," Marin said, projecting her voice clearly. "My name is Marin, and I am an attorney representing Sutton regarding a warranty deed recorded in Travis County late Friday afternoon that currently bears your official notary seal. Can you please confirm if you met with my client in person to verify her identity for this transaction?" There was a sharp, audible gasp on the other end of the line. The background noise of the coffee shop seemed to fade away. "Oh my God," the woman's voice shook with sudden panic. "No. I have never met anyone named Sutton. I haven't executed a single notary act for anyone in over 60 days. I filed a formal police report with the Austin Police Department 2 full months ago because my physical seal and my digital e-record credentials were stolen out of the trunk of my vehicle during a smash-and-grab robbery." I stared across the desk at Marin, my mind reeling, trying to process the magnitude of what I was hearing. Stolen? This wasn't just a case of Vesper paying off a shady, corrupt notary to look the other way. As a licensed commercial real estate broker, Vesper had deep access to the private network lists of mobile notaries in the county. She, or someone she hired specifically for this task, had actively acquired a stolen physical stamp and a set of compromised e-record credentials to bypass the state's security protocols entirely. They had constructed a flawless, synthetic fraud package entirely from scratch. The sheer scale of the criminality was breathtaking. They hadn't just crossed a moral line in a bitter family dispute. They had walked face-first into felony land fraud, identity theft, and federal bank fraud. They had meticulously planned this, piece by piece, knowing exactly how to manipulate the county system. Marin calmly thanked the terrified notary, assured her that she was not the target of our investigation, and hung up the phone. The heavy silence returned to the office. Marin slid a clean, empty blue folder across the desk toward me. She folded her hands and looked me dead in the eye. "The trap is officially set," she said quietly. "The documents have been electronically filed. Now, we simply let the notices hit their system, and we wait for the rats to realize the ship is sinking." Part 6. 17 missed calls and the panic word count. 1,100 words. By 4:30 in the afternoon, the heavy, invisible legal machinery that Marin had set in motion finally began to take its toll on the real world. I had left the law office and returned to my leasing office. I was sitting quietly at my desk with a lukewarm cup of black coffee, watching the shadows lengthen across the hardwood floorboards as the sun began to set over the Texas hills. For hours, my phone had been completely silent. It was a strange, incredibly tense calm before the storm. I knew the bank's automated systems were processing the fraud alerts. I knew the county was flagging the parcel. At exactly 5:32 in the afternoon, almost 24 hours to the minute since Vesper had thrown her glass of red wine at me in that crowded restaurant, the screen of my phone lit up brightly. It was Vesper calling. I did not answer. I sat perfectly still and watched it ring. The phone buzzed violently against the wood of the desk, died out, and then immediately began ringing again. Then Declan's name flashed across the screen. Then Vesper again. Then Declan. Within the span of 45 short minutes, my notification log showed exactly 17 missed calls from my mother-in-law and 9 rapid-fire calls from my husband. The pure, unbridled arrogance that had defined them on Saturday night had vanished entirely, replaced by a frantic, desperate, suffocating urgency. Finally, a voicemail notification popped up on the screen. I tapped the icon and placed the phone on speaker, letting the audio fill the quiet, empty room. Vesper's voice echoed out, and it was incredibly tight. The polished, upper-class warmth she usually projected to the world was entirely stripped away. There was an underlying current of raw, unfiltered panic in her tone that made the hairs on my arms stand up and my skin prickle with deep satisfaction. "Sutton," she gasped, her breath catching in her throat as if she had been running. "You need to call me back immediately. Stop being childish and answer your phone right now. Whatever your lawyer just filed with the county has triggered an automatic administrative freeze on the property. The bank is halting our entire operational line of credit, and they are threatening to audit my brokerage's trust accounts. You are ruining things you don't understand. Call me back before they destroy everything." I did not call her back. I didn't even touch the phone. Not after the first message, and certainly not after the second one where Declan left a voice note begging me to pick up the phone and just think about our future together. I remembered Marin's sharp, brilliant advice from that morning: let the panic ripen. When people who are used to operating their entire lives with absolute impunity suddenly find their path blocked by a solid brick wall of legal reality, they do not become smarter. They become desperate. And desperate people make massive, catastrophic mistakes. I sat back in my heavy chair, watching the phone screen light up and ring for the 18th time. I realized in that quiet moment that the power dynamic of my entire life had completely shifted. They were no longer the elite, untouchable family dictating cruel terms to a helpless outsider. They were actively drowning in a massive flood of their own making, and I was the only person in the world who held the lifeline. But I had absolutely no intention of throwing it to them. Let them sink. If you are sitting there right now, feeling the intense adrenaline and completely losing your mind over the sheer audacity of this toxic family, do me a huge favor. Leave a comment down below right now with the phrase, "I'm win." That is our secret code for the true justice seekers who have made it halfway through this insane ride with me. I promise I will personally drop a heart and reply to every single comment that includes "I'm win." It really helps support the channel, and it lets me know you are ready for the ultimate takedown. The morning sun had barely begun to warm the Texas pavement when the next phase of their desperate scheme unfolded. I was sitting in Marin's sleek conference room again, nursing my second cup of black coffee. We were reviewing the final confirmation receipts from the county clerk when my cell phone vibrated violently against the mahogany table. It was a text message from Mrs. Barrel. She was a retired middle school teacher who lived in the house directly across the street from my primary residence, the one I shared with Declan before this entire nightmare began. Mrs. Barrel was notoriously observant, spending her days gardening and keeping a watchful eye on the neighborhood. I unlocked the screen and read her message. The text said, "Sutton, your mother-in-law and your husband are at your house right now. They pulled up 10 minutes ago. They are carrying heavy cardboard banker boxes up the driveway. Should I call the police department?" My blood ran cold. The sheer audacity of it was staggering. They knew the bank had frozen the funds, they knew their fraudulent deed had been flagged by the county, and their immediate response was to break into my personal space. I showed the screen to Marin. Her jaw tightened, and she stood up immediately, grabbing her heavy leather briefcase and her car keys in one fluid motion. "Do not call the police just yet," Marin instructed, her voice entirely flat and tactical. "Tell your neighbor to stay safely on her porch and record everything on her phone. We are leaving right now." Desperate people do not go back to the scene of the crime to apologize. They go back to destroy the evidence before the authorities arrive. I typed a rapid reply to Mrs. Barrel, instructing her to stay hidden but keep the camera rolling. I grabbed my purse and Marin and I sprinted down the hallway to the parking garage. The drive from the downtown law office to my suburban neighborhood took exactly 22 minutes, but it felt like an eternity. My hands gripped the dashboard as Marin navigated the heavy morning traffic with terrifying precision. My mind raced through the possibilities. What were they looking for? What were they trying to hide? The realization hit me like a physical blow. They were trying to control the paper trail. They were looking for the mailed notices from the county recorder, the physical letters from the bank, and any digital footprint left behind by their weekend of forgery. When Marin's car turned the final corner onto my quiet, tree-lined street, the scene playing out in my driveway was surreal. Vesper's pristine white luxury SUV was parked aggressively behind Declan's pickup truck, entirely blocking the path to the garage. The heavy wooden front door of my house was propped wide open, letting the morning air sweep inside. Across the street, Mrs. Barrel was standing on her porch in a floral cardigan, holding a watering can in one hand and her cell phone in the other, bravely documenting every single movement. She gave me a small, determined nod as we pulled up to the curb. I unbuckled my seatbelt before the car had even fully stopped. I pushed the door open and marched up the concrete driveway, my boots hitting the ground with heavy, purposeful thuds. Marin was right beside me, her phone already raised and recording video. As I stepped through the front doorway, the sight before me made my stomach churn with pure anger. Vesper was standing in the center of my kitchen. She had laid out 2 stacks of opened envelopes on my marble island. She was holding a blue file folder that belonged in my private home office. She looked up when I walked in, her eyes wide for a fraction of a second, before she instantly rearranged her features into a mask of righteous indignation. She tried to look like I was the one intruding on her property. "Oh good," Vesper said, her voice dripping with forced condescension. "You're here. Now maybe we can stop this ridiculous, emotional spiral and handle family matters like adults. I am just trying to clean up the mess you made." I ignored her entirely. My eyes darted down the hallway. Declan was emerging from my home office. He was breathing heavily, his face flushed with sweat. In his arms, he was carrying my heavy, professional-grade laser printer and scanner unit. He had yanked the cords directly out of the wall. Sitting on the floor next to him were 2 large banker boxes, already half filled with my personal mail and office supplies. The sight of my husband looting my home office felt worse than the glass of red wine. It was a profound, intimate violation. People only steal heavy office machinery when that machinery remembers things they desperately want forgotten. "What exactly are you doing?" I asked, my voice deadly calm. Declan jumped, nearly dropping the heavy plastic unit. He set the printer down on top of the nearest box, refusing to meet my eyes. He ran a hand through his hair, trying to feign casual frustration. "I am just grabbing my work equipment, Sutton. I need to run my business, and you locked me out of the joint accounts." "That is not your equipment," I replied, taking a step closer. "That is my personal property inside my home." Vesper let out a loud, theatrical sigh and slammed the blue folder down on the counter. Stop performing this aggressive ownership routine in front of your lawyer, Sutton. We are trying to protect what little legacy this family has left. The bank is overreacting to a simple paperwork error, and we need these files to clear up the confusion. Marin stepped forward then, her presence commanding the entire room. She looked at Vesper with the cold, detached interest of a scientist studying a bug. It is fascinating that you call it a paperwork error, Marin said smoothly. I would hate to think you were standing in my client's home, actively removing electronic devices and stealing federal mail, immediately after receiving formal notice of a forged deed claim. That looks a lot like tampering with evidence in an active felony investigation. Neither of them answered. The silence that followed was incredibly loud. Declan swallowed hard, his eyes darting toward the front door. Vesper's jaw clenched, the carefully applied makeup on her face failing to hide the pale, sickly color of her skin. They were caught. And they knew it. I took my phone out of my pocket and held it up, making sure the red recording light was clearly visible. Declan saw the lens pointed at him, and his entire posture shifted. His shoulders slumped, and he held his hands up in that fake, peaceful gesture men use when they want to appear harmless for the cameras. Seriously, Sutton? Declan asked, his voice whining. Are you really recording us? Yes, I said, not lowering my arm an inch. I am recording thieves in my home. Sutton, listen to me, Declan pleaded, taking a cautious step forward. When the bank flagged the first intake package, my mother and I realized there was a slight clerical mismatch. We can fix all of this right now. We can withdraw the application if you just stop making this so adversarial. You are destroying our marriage over a misunderstanding. Marin let out a short, sharp laugh. The first intake package? She repeated, raising an eyebrow. She stepped directly between Declan and the cardboard boxes. Are you openly admitting that you submitted multiple versions of a fraudulent title transfer? Declan froze. He realized too late what he had just confessed out loud. Vesper lunged forward, trying to cut off his words. He means the preliminary draft copy, she snapped, glaring at Marin. He misspoke due to the intense stress your client has put us under. No, Marin said softly, stepping closer to the printer resting on the box. He did not misspeak. He is referring to the fact that you recorded one fake deed with the county on Friday, and you were desperately trying to fabricate a second one to cover your tracks today. Declan swore under his breath. I walked past him, heading straight into my home office. The room was a disaster. Desk drawers were yanked open, file cabinets were left unlocked, and papers were scattered across the rug. But then I saw it. Resting on the very corner of my mahogany desk, half hidden beneath a yellow legal pad, was a single sheet of heavy cream paper. I picked it up. My stomach twisted into a tight knot. The page was covered in ink. It was my name, written over and over again in different pressure lines, different angles, and different styles. Sutton Porter. Sutton Hale. Sutton Hale Porter. It was a practice sheet. They had sat at my desk, using my pens, practicing how to forge my identity. I walked back into the hallway, holding the paper up for the camera to capture. Look at this, I said. Declan lunged for it. Give me that paper, Sutton. I stepped backward, pulling it out of his reach. Marin turned on him, her voice turning into a bark. Do not touch her. Take one more step toward my client, and I will have you arrested for assault before the hour is up. Vesper panicked. The sight of the practice sheet shattered her remaining composure. She looked at the boxes, looked at the printer, and then made the most foolish, incriminating statement possible. She looked directly at her son and yelled, "Forget the stupid practice sheet, Declan. Just grab the stolen stamp page and the clean notary acknowledgement before they photograph everything." She actually said it. Out loud. On video. The stolen stamp page. Declan closed his eyes, his face contorting in pure frustration. He wasn't guilty, he was just furious that his mother had stopped being careful. Marin didn't waste a second. She turned her attention to the heavy office printer sitting on the cardboard box. She reached out and firmly pressed the power button. The digital touchscreen flickered, glowing bright blue in the dim hallway. You cannot look at that, Declan argued, his voice cracking. That is private family property. Marin held up a hand, blocking him from the machine. No, Declan. What is private is privileged attorney communication. What is currently sitting on the internal memory drive of this machine is material evidence of bank fraud. Let us see exactly what this device remembers. She tapped the screen, navigating to the recent jobs history log. The printer was an expensive model, designed to store the last 50 documents scanned or printed in its internal hard drive for easy reprinting. A detailed list populated on the screen, complete with exact timestamps. I leaned over Marin's shoulder, keeping my phone steady to record every single line of text. The file names were damning. Sutton_deed_final.pdf. Notary_stamp_scan.jpg. Texas_bank_collateral_packet.docs. Borrower_signature_page_clean.pdf. Every single file had been created, scanned, and printed on Friday afternoon, utilizing my home office network. They had sat in my chair, used my internet connection to mask their IP address, and fabricated a massive federal crime. They had left the files sitting in the machine's recent history because Declan simply had not been fast enough to erase the memory drive before running to the restaurant to throw wine in my face. Vesper took a frantic step toward the wall outlet. Unplug it, she hissed to Declan. Turn the machine off right now. Photograph every single screen, Marin instructed me, her voice cold and steady. Photograph every file name and timestamp. I did. My hands were perfectly steady. I captured everything. Just as I finished, a shadow fell across the open doorway. Mrs. Barrel had walked across the street and was standing boldly on my front porch, her phone still raised. I captured the driveway footage, too, Mrs. Barrel announced cheerfully. I got clear video of her unloading the empty boxes and him carrying the printer cables out of the garage. Vesper rounded on the elderly woman, her eyes wild. This is none of your business, you nosy old bat. Go back to your garden. Mrs. Barrel did not flinch. She adjusted her glasses and stared Vesper down. You made it the entire neighborhood's business when you decided to scream at Sutton in public and steal from her home. For the first time since the horrific restaurant incident, Vesper truly looked rattled. The walls were closing in, and she could feel the steel trap snapping shut on her ankles. Just as Vesper opened her mouth to scream at my neighbor again, a sleek black sedan pulled up to the curb directly behind Marin's vehicle. Two people stepped out of the car, moving with the brisk, undeniable authority of individuals who carry heavy government badges. The first was a woman wearing a sharp navy suit and carrying a slim metal laptop case. The second was a tall, imposing man holding a rugged Pelican hard case. They walked up the driveway, bypassing Vesper's SUV, and stepped onto the front porch next to Mrs. Barrel. The woman looked at the address numbers on the brick pillar, then looked directly at me. Are you Sutton? The woman asked. Her voice was clipped, formal, and entirely devoid of warmth. I nodded. My name is Halston. I am the senior fraud investigator for Texas Commercial Bank's Collateral Division. This is Quaid, the regional compliance officer for the Travis County Recorder. We need to know immediately if the two individuals standing inside your hallway are the same people who submitted the commercial line request on Friday. I did not even have to answer. Halston stepped through the doorway, her sharp eyes sweeping over the chaotic scene. She took in the sight of the open banker boxes filled with mail, the dismantled heavy printer, the blue folders, and the sheer terror radiating from Declan and Vesper. Her expression shifted from professional concern to grim confirmation. So, it is them, she stated flatly. Declan tried to recover his shattered bravado. He puffed out his chest and took a step toward Halston. Listen, you need to leave. This is private marital property, and we are simply handling a domestic dispute regarding shared assets. Halston did not even blink. She stared right through him. No, Declan. This is legally disputed collateral tied to a potentially fraudulent instrument that touched a federally insured bank before funding. Step away from that machine immediately, or I will have local law enforcement physically remove you from the premises. That threat stopped him much more effectively than screaming ever could. Declan stumbled backward, nearly tripping over a rug. Quaid walked past him, set the heavy Pelican case down on my dining room table, and unlatched it. He pulled out a specialized document scanner, several clear evidence sleeves, and a county-issued field tablet. He glanced once at the glowing screen of my printer, then looked at the practice signature sheet I was still holding. "Good," Quaid said, his voice deep and gravelly. "Do not let anyone touch that touch panel." Vesper finally found her voice. The panic was breaking through her polished exterior. "This is outrageous. We were just trying to gather our personal items before this divorce turned ugly. You have no right to barge in here." Marin turned to face her. "Then you picked a very strange, unfortunate moment to collect a printer full of forged deed jobs and stolen notary scans, Vesper." Halston had already opened her metal laptop on the kitchen island. She was typing with terrifying speed, accessing the bank's secure collateral portal. "The emergency line of credit remains unfunded," she announced to the room. "But your deed package triggered 3 massive security holds by 9 o'clock this morning. We detected a signature mismatch against historical records, a highly suspicious same-day collateral shift, and a failed owner verification check." I looked at Halston, confused. "A failed check? What does that mean?" Halston nodded grimly. "Someone answered the automated owner verification callback we issued on Saturday morning. But when our internal reviewer asked the female on the line to confirm the last 4 digits of the county tax account and the exact month the massive roof and drainage work was completed, the answers provided were entirely wrong." I turned slowly and stared at Vesper. Her face was chalk white. Her hands were shaking violently by her sides. She had actively tried to impersonate my voice on a recorded banking call, and she had failed miserably because she knew absolutely nothing about the actual maintenance of the building she was trying to steal. Halston kept reading from her screen. Then, after the second review flag, someone called the bank back from a different phone number. They insisted that the property owner was simply too emotional and unstable to participate in the call, and that the husband had full legal authority under the newly recorded deed. There it was again. The exact same manipulative language. Too emotional. Unstable. It was the exact same logic Vesper had used at the restaurant to justify throwing the wine. It was their universal excuse for stealing first and explaining later. Quaid spoke up from the dining table. "The county recording office has a parallel, severe concern." He connected his field tablet to the county portal, typed in the instrument number of the deed, and brought up the hidden metadata. The electronic record package was submitted at 4:46 on Friday. The originating account was not a licensed title company, and it was not a registered law office. It was filed through a remote submitter credential tied to an independent mobile notary service. Marin crossed her arms. "You mean the notary whose physical stamp was reported stolen 2 months ago?" "Yes," Quaid confirmed. "Which means whoever used her physical seal also illegally accessed her secure e-record submitter credentials to bypass the county firewall." Declan tried one last, pathetic defense. "So blame the notary. She probably sold her credentials online. We just hired a service." Quaid turned the tablet screen toward Declan, showing a digital map with a glowing red dot. "It is incredibly hard to blame a random notary when the upload source device matches the exact same residential IP address block that your bank packet came from." The room went dead silent. The only sound was the hum of the refrigerator. Residential IP block. My house. They had executed the digital upload right here. In my private office. On my internet connection. They had dragged the crime directly into my sanctuary. Marin spoke very softly, driving the final nail into the coffin. "You recorded a forged deed from her home network before going to dinner. You sat in her chair and stole her property." Declan did not answer. He looked like he was going to be sick. Quaid began photographing everything in the room in meticulous order. The printer screen, the banker boxes, the practice signatures, the opened mail. Then he stopped at one loose page sitting inside the top box. He lifted it up with 2 fingers. It was a typed checklist. Quaid read it aloud. Deed recorded. Loan intake submitted. Owner call route to Vesper if pushback. Final wet pages move. House mail intercept. My stomach dropped. Call route to Vesper. There was no wiggle room left. No marital misunderstanding. No family sloppiness. This was a premeditated, step-by-step criminal conspiracy. Declan saw the checklist and whispered, "Mom, what did you write down?" Vesper snapped, "Shut your mouth, Declan. Do not say another word." It was far too late. Quaid slid the checklist into a clear plastic evidence sleeve. Halston's phone buzzed loudly. She checked the screen and looked up, her eyes locking onto Vesper. "The Collateral Committee just escalated the file," Halston said. "They are preparing a formal federal fraud referral to the authorities. They are also issuing a direct freeze on the cross-collateral guarantor." Declan went pale. "A freeze on who?" Halston closed her laptop with a sharp snap. "Your mother's commercial real estate brokerage. All connected accounts are locked pending investigation. The money is gone." The air in the hallway felt incredibly thin. Vesper stumbled backward until her back hit the drywall. She gasped for air as if she had just been plunged into freezing water. The realization that her pristine, high-society commercial firm, the very foundation of her arrogant identity, was now locked under a federal fraud investigation was destroying her in real time. But Marin was not finished. She noticed something sitting inside the second cardboard box near Declan's feet. It was Declan's slim silver laptop. The lid was closed, but a small green light indicated the machine was merely asleep, not fully powered down. Marin pointed at it. "Quaid," Marin said firmly. "I highly suggest you secure that device before the battery dies. Given the checklist we just found, I imagine the hard drive contains the rest of the operational blueprint." Declan lunged for the box, his previous fear replaced by blind panic. "You cannot take my computer. That violates my rights." Quaid stepped smoothly into Declan's path, using his large frame as a physical barrier. He reached down and pulled the laptop from the box. "Since you were actively attempting to remove it from a location tied to the fraudulent IP upload, it is now considered material evidence of a disputed transaction." He opened the lid. The screen immediately woke up. Declan had been in such a frantic rush to unplug everything that he had never bothered to lock the computer or close his open windows. Quaid placed the laptop on the kitchen counter, and Halston, Marin, and I leaned in to look at the screen. Resting plainly on the digital desktop were 3 prominent PDF files and 1 open Word document. The PDFs were labeled with horrifying clarity. Corrective_deed_final.pdf. Affidavit_clean.pdf. If_bank_calls_read_this.docs. I stared at the third file name. My hands went ice cold. Halston reached out and double-clicked the Word document. It opened instantly, revealing a neatly formatted script. It was a list of short bullet points, anticipated questions from bank investigators, and carefully crafted, exact phrases to use in response. It was a masterclass in premeditated deception. Halston read the bullet points aloud, her voice echoing in the silent kitchen. If asked whether owner is present, answer, "Owner is currently overwhelmed and deferring all financial matters to spouse." If asked about recent title change, answer, "This is a family confirmation only, correcting a previous oversight." If asked about signature variance, answer, "Owner suffered an old wrist injury that affects handwriting consistency." If asked about business purpose, answer, "Temporary household restructuring for tax benefits." They had a written script for lying as me. They had planned to blame my forged signature on a phantom wrist injury. They had planned to portray me as a weak, overwhelmed woman who needed her strong husband to handle her affairs. It was the ultimate insult, a profound violation of my independence and my sanity. Mrs. Barrel, still standing like a glorious suburban guardian spirit on the front porch, lowered her phone slightly and muttered, "Oh, these people are utterly disgusting. They belong in a cage." No one corrected her. Halston pulled out her own phone and took high-resolution photographs of the screen, capturing every single word of the script. Quaid bagged the laptop in a large anti-static evidence bag. Then, Halston made a direct phone call to her department head at the bank. Her voice was the calmest, most terrifying sound imaginable. Yes, confirm the federal fraud referral, Halston said into the phone. Confirm the absolute rejection of all collateral. And initiate an adverse account review for all connected borrower entities. Yes, including the guarantor's primary operating accounts. Lock them all down. Vesper pushed away from the wall, her manicured hands trembling so hard she could barely keep them raised. When you do that, you will destroy my company, she whispered, her voice cracking into a desperate plea. I have peril to meet. I have investors. You cannot freeze my operational funds over a family dispute. Halston did not even look up from her paperwork. You tried to borrow over $1 million against a house your son did not own. You utilized a forged deed and a stolen notary seal. You attempted to impersonate the legal owner on a recorded federal line. Your company was already walking blindly toward the edge of a cliff, Vesper. I am just refusing to move the cliff back for you. That was the exact moment Vesper finally understood the gravity of the 17 missed calls. The frantic voicemails, the panic, the rush to the house. She had not been trying to apologize to me. She had been desperately trying to get me on the phone quickly enough to stop the heavy machinery from crushing her. She thought she could manipulate me into withdrawing the fraud claim before the bank found out. But once the banking regulators, the county recording compliance officers, and my attorney all touched the same fraud at the exact same time, the private family exit ramp was permanently closed. There was no going back. Before we witness the final, satisfying collapse of this toxic family, take a moment to interact with the story. Do you think Vesper deserves to go to prison for orchestrating this fraud, or is losing her entire elite business empire enough punishment for her arrogance? Let me know in the comments below. Declan realized that his mother was defeated. Her business was frozen, her reputation was destroyed, and she was facing potential criminal indictment. He turned his attention back to me. It was his last, pathetic attempt to salvage his crumbling life. He walked toward me, tears welling up in his eyes, abandoning his aggressive posture for the role of the broken, misunderstood husband. Sutton, please, Declan begged, his voice cracking. Tell them it was a massive marital mistake. Tell them we were just trying to add my name properly so we could build a family, and the paperwork simply got ahead of itself. We can withdraw everything. I will move out. Just tell them not to file the criminal referral. Please, Sutton. You love me. I looked at him. I stared deeply into the eyes of the man I had married. I looked at the man who had sat silently at a restaurant table, staring at his expensive pasta, while his mother threw a glass of red wine into my face because I refused to turn my hard-earned property into collateral for his massive failures. I looked at the man who had stood inside my home office, yanking cords out of the wall, desperately packing up my mail into cardboard boxes, and calling it a family correction. I looked at the man who had a typed script open on his laptop, actively teaching him how to impersonate my voice and steal my future. I felt no pity. I felt no sorrow. I only felt a profound, liberating clarity. No, I said. Just that one single word. There was no grand speech. There was no shaking, no screaming, and no tears. I simply denied him the very thing he needed most. Marin stepped forward, her voice ringing with finality. You both need to leave this property immediately. This time they did. They did not leave because they suddenly found their missing shame. They left because they had finally, violently collided with the real-world consequences of their actions. Vesper walked out first. She kept her chin held high, her face a rigid mask of shattered pride, which was almost impressive given the circumstances. She refused to look at me as she marched down the driveway toward her pristine SUV. Declan left second. He walked slowly, his shoulders hunched, carrying absolutely nothing. Halston and Quaid made sure of that. The banker boxes stayed in the hallway. The heavy printer stayed on the box. His silver laptop stayed secured inside the Pelican case until the digital images were fully preserved and the copies logged into evidence. Mrs. Barrel stood on her porch, happily filming their vehicles reversing out of the driveway, treating their humiliating retreat like a community service event. By 6 o'clock that evening, the county clerk's office had issued a formal challenge hold on the forged recorded deed, effectively erasing it from the public view. By the next morning, Texas Commercial Bank sent formal written confirmation that Declan's massive line of credit request was permanently denied. The fraudulent collateral package had been referred internally to the bank's legal department and externally to federal regulators. Not a single dime had ever been released against my property. At noon that same day, Marin officially filed the civil action in state court to void the forged instrument entirely. At 3 o'clock, she filed an emergency injunction granting me exclusive possession of the house during the dispute, along with a strict restraining order barring Declan from representing any ownership interest in my assets pending the resolution of the fraud investigation. At 5:30, I hired a professional crew to change every single lock on the house, the garage, and the apartment complex office. I did not do it because I thought Declan had a legal right to come back. I did it because I had finally accepted the harsh truth that legal reality and physical security were not always on the same schedule, and I would never allow them to violate my space again. 2 weeks later, the forged deed was officially struck from the county chain of title. It was a swift, brutal court order, not a lengthy family debate. The bank's fraud unit preserved all the digital evidence. The county recorder's office forwarded the stolen notary issue and the IP logs onward to the district attorney. Vesper's commercial event and real estate company permanently lost its banking line of credit. Unable to meet payroll or satisfy her furious investors, her firm folded under the weight of the federal investigation. Declan's sports gym and equipment distributorship collapsed entirely before the month ended, buried under a mountain of unpaid vendor debt. I formally filed for divorce before either of them could convince themselves there was still a marriage left to weaponize. And miraculously, Vesper stopped calling me. She did not stop because she suddenly found deep remorse for what she had done. She stopped calling because panic has a very strict expiration date once it realizes the person it desperately needs is no longer available for manipulation. In the long, quiet months that followed, the drama faded away in the best way possible. There was no more screaming in public restaurants. There were no more mysterious cream envelopes pushed across tables. There were no more demands for simple title updates. There was only the slow, unglamorous, but incredibly satisfying work of legally undoing the damage they had tried to inflict in one reckless weekend. Marin ensured the forged deed was removed fully from the title history, leaving my record spotless. And the apartment complex stayed exactly what it had always been from the very beginning. Mine. Declan tried one final time, through his expensive defense counsel, to paint the entire ordeal as a tragic marital misunderstanding driven by immense business stress. That pathetic defense died the exact moment the printer IP logs, the practice signature sheets, the callback script, and Vesper's fake witness affidavit all sat on the same table in the mediator's office. Vesper's elite empire never recovered after the bank reviews hit the public record. That was the true, terrifying source of her panic on that Saturday night. It was not about the wine, and it was not even really about me. It was the horrifying moment she realized my refusal to submit had finally, permanently become her catastrophic paperwork. As for me, I kept the house, I kept my maiden name, and I learned a lesson I should have learned much sooner in life. Some people do not want partnership, love, or fairness when they invite you into their family. They only want access to your resources. And the angriest they will ever get is when a door they simply assumed would open for them stays permanently, solidly locked. If you made it this far, tell me in the comments, what would you have done after the wine was thrown? Would you have walked out quietly like I did to build an airtight legal case, or would you have exposed everything right there in the middle of the restaurant? And what piece of evidence hit the hardest for you? The 17 missed calls, the stolen notary stamp, or that disgusting lying script on Declan's laptop? If you liked this story of ultimate revenge and justice, please leave a like, hit that subscribe button, and stay with me for the next one. Thank you for watching.